The morning sun had barely risen over the small town of Millbrook when Sarah Thompson pulled her silver sedan into the parking lot of Morrison's coffee shop. She wore a simple navy blue blazer over a white blouse, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. After years of working in government offices and attending endless meetings, she had learned to dress professionally, even on her days off. Today was supposed to be different, though. Today she had decided to visit her hometown incognito without the usual security detail and official vehicles that accompanied her everywhere. Sarah had grown up in Millbrook, in a modest house on Elm Street where her mother still lived. She remembered running through these same streets as a child, playing hopscotch with neighborhood kids, and buying candy from the corner store with quarters she had saved. But that was 30 years ago, before college, before law school, before her career in public service had taken off in ways she never imagined possible. Now, at 42, she held one of the highest offices in the state, but today, she just wanted to be Sarah from Elm Street again. She walked into Morrison's and ordered a large coffee with cream. The elderly woman behind the counter squinted at her for a moment, as if trying to place her face, but then simply smiled and took her money. Sarah felt relieved. She grabbed her coffee and headed back to her car, planning to drive by her old elementary school and maybe stop by the park where she used to swing for hours. As she reached for her car door, she noticed a police cruiser pulling into the parking lot behind her. Two officers stepped out, both white men who looked to be in their 30s. One was tall and stocky with a crew cut, while the other was shorter with a thin mustache. They walked toward the coffee shop entrance, but the taller one, whose badge read Officer Daniels, stopped and looked in her direction. "Morning, ma'am," he called out, his tone casual but carrying an edge of authority. Sarah nodded politely. "Good morning, officer." Daniels nudged his partner, Officer Rodriguez, and they both changed direction, walking toward her instead of the coffee shop. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the same feeling she had experienced countless times throughout her life when she was followed in stores or watched suspiciously in upscale neighborhoods. "Nice car," Daniels said, looking at her sedan with exaggerated interest. "This yours?" "Yes, it is," Sarah replied calmly, though her hand tightened around her coffee cup. "Registration and license?" Rodriguez asked, stepping closer. Sarah took a slow breath. "May I ask why you're asking for my information, officer? I haven't broken any laws." Daniel smirked. "We've had reports of car thefts in this area. Just doing our job, making sure everything's legitimate. You understand?" She understood perfectly. She had heard these same words, these same excuses throughout her life. She had heard them even more frequently from constituents who shared their stories with her, people who looked like her and faced these situations daily. But today, she had hoped for something different. She had hoped her hometown had changed. "I can show you my registration," Sarah said quietly, reaching slowly for her purse so as not to alarm them. "Keep your hands where we can see them," Daniel said sharply, his hand moving instinctively toward his belt. Sarah froze, her hand halfway to her purse. Her heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm. "My registration is in my purse, officer. I'm just reaching for it." Rodriguez stepped around to the other side of her car, peering through the windows. "Where are you coming from this morning?" he asked. "I'm visiting family," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the anger building inside her. "I grew up here in Millbrook." "Is that right?" Daniel said, his tone dripping with skepticism. "Funny, I don't recognize you." "It's been many years since I lived here," she explained, finally pulling out her wallet. She handed him her license and registration through the car window she had just unlocked. Daniels examined the documents, his eyebrows raising slightly as he read the name. But instead of any recognition or apology, his smirk grew wider. He showed the license to Rodriguez, who chuckled. "Sarah Thompson," Daniels read aloud mockingly. "Well, Miss Thompson, we're going to need you to step away from the vehicle." "Excuse me?" Sarah said, her professional composure beginning to crack. "On what grounds?" "We have reasonable suspicion that this vehicle might be stolen," Rodriguez said, though his tone suggested he was enjoying this. "We need to verify a few more things." Sarah knew the law better than most people. She knew they Had no reasonable suspicion, no probable cause, nothing that would justify what they were doing. This was harassment, pure and simple, and she had seen it happen to countless others. But experiencing it herself in her own hometown felt like a betrayal she had not prepared for. "This is ridiculous," she said firmly. "You have my license and registration right there. Everything is in order." "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to place your hands on the hood of the car," Daniels said, his voice taking on a harder edge. The coffee shop door opened, and a few customers stepped out, stopping to watch the scene unfolding in the parking lot. Sarah felt humiliation wash over her, but she also felt something else: determination. She would comply, she would stay calm, but she would also remember every single detail of this encounter. She placed her coffee cup on the roof of her car and put her hands on the warm hood. Daniels approached from behind while Rodriguez watched from the side. "Is this really necessary?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Just following procedure," Daniels replied, though the amusement in his voice suggested otherwise. Then, in a moment that would later be described as shockingly unprofessional, Daniels pulled out his handcuffs and clicked them loosely around Sarah's wrists. "There we go," he said with a laugh. "Just want to make sure you don't go anywhere while we sort this out." Rodriguez laughed too, shaking his head. "Come on, Dan, that's a bit much." "Just having a little fun," Daniels said, grinning. "No harm done, right, Miss Thompson?" Sarah stood there, hands cuffed behind her back in the parking lot of her hometown coffee shop, and felt a cold fury settle over her. She had spent years fighting for justice, for equality, for the rights of people who faced exactly this kind of treatment every day. And now she was experiencing it firsthand, treated like a criminal for no reason other than the color of her skin. The small crowd from the coffee shop had grown, people whispering and pointing. Some filmed on their phones. Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to let them see her cry, refusing to give these officers the satisfaction of breaking her spirit. "Officer Daniels," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made him pause. "I suggest you check your database very carefully, and I suggest you call your supervisor immediately." Daniel's smile faltered slightly. "Oh yeah? And why's that?" "Because," Sarah said, turning her head to look him directly in the eye, "you're going to want someone with more authority here when you realize exactly who you just handcuffed." Something in her tone, something in the way she held herself despite the cuffs made both officers exchange an uncertain glance. But they were too far into their performance now, too committed to backing down easily. "Big talk for someone in handcuffs," Rodriguez said, but his voice lacked the earlier confidence. Sarah said nothing more. She simply waited, knowing that the truth would reveal itself soon enough, and when it did, these officers would face consequences they had never imagined. The morning that had started with hope and nostalgia had become something else entirely, but Sarah Thompson had not gotten where she was by backing down from injustice, even when that injustice was directed at her. Officer Daniels walked back to his patrol car with Sarah's license and registration, leaving her standing by her vehicle with loose handcuffs still around her wrists. Rodriguez stayed nearby, occasionally glancing at the growing crowd of onlookers. Sarah could hear people murmuring, some expressing outrage while others simply watched with morbid curiosity. She kept her eyes forward, maintaining her dignity despite the humiliating situation. Inside the patrol car, Daniels ran Sarah's information through the computer system. He expected to find nothing unusual, maybe a traffic ticket or two at most. This was just another routine stop in his mind, another day of maintaining order in Millbrook. He had done this dozens of times before and nothing had ever come of it. Why should today be any different? But as the information loaded on his screen, his casual expression began to change. His eyes widened, and he leaned closer to the monitor, certain he was reading something wrong. The name matched. The birth date matched. The address listed was in the state capital. And then he saw the notation at the top of the file, marked in red letters that law enforcement across the state would immediately recognize. His hand started to shake. He read the information 3 more times, hoping somehow it would change, hoping he had made a mistake. But there was no mistake. Sarah Marie Thompson, standing in handcuffs by her car in the Morrison's coffee shop parking lot, was not just any citizen. She was the daughter of Governor Marcus Thompson, one of the most powerful political figures in the state. And more than that, according to the database notes, she herself held a significant position in the state government, working directly in the governor's office as his chief legal counsel. "Oh no," Daniels whispered to himself, his stomach dropping. "Oh no, no, no." He stumbled out of the patrol car, his face suddenly pale. Rodriguez noticed immediately. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniels grabbed Rodriguez's arm and pulled him away from Sarah, speaking in an urgent whisper. "Do you know who that is?" Rodriguez shrugged. "Some woman with an attitude problem?" "That's Sarah Thompson," Daniels hissed. "Governor Thompson's daughter. She works in his office. She's basically state government royalty, you idiot." All the color drained from Rodriguez's face. He looked back at Sarah, who stood calmly by her car, still in handcuffs, watching them with an expression that was somehow both patient and condemning. "You're joking," Rodriguez said weakly. "Do I look like I'm joking?" Daniel snapped. "We just handcuffed the governor's daughter for absolutely no reason. We're done. We're so done." Rodriguez ran his hand through his hair, panic setting in. Okay, we just take off the cuffs, apologize, and let her go. Maybe she'll be understanding, maybe she won't report this." Daniels looked at the crowd of people with their phones out, recording everything. "Are you kidding me? Half the town just watched us humiliate her. This is probably already on social media. We're going to be famous for all the wrong reasons." They stood there for a moment, frozen by the magnitude of their mistake. Every joke they had made, every condescending word, every assumption they had, acted on now replayed in their minds with horrifying clarity. This was not just a bad stop. This was career-ending. This was potentially criminal, given that they had handcuffed her without any legitimate cause. Finally, Daniels forced himself to walk back to Sarah. His swagger from earlier had completely vanished, replaced by the nervous steps of a man walking toward his own doom. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "I need to remove these handcuffs." "That would be appropriate," Sarah said coolly, turning around to present her cuffed wrists. Daniels fumbled with the key, his hands shaking so badly that it took him 3 tries to unlock the cuffs. When they finally clicked open, Sarah rubbed her wrists and turned to face both officers. The crowd had grown even larger now, and several people were openly recording the confrontation. "Officers," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the parking lot so everyone could hear, "I would like your badge numbers and the name of your commanding officer." "Ms. Thompson, I am so sorry," Daniels stammered. "This was a terrible misunderstanding. We were just following up on reports of stolen vehicles in the area, and we made an error in judgment." "An error in judgment?" Sarah repeated, her tone sharp enough to cut glass. "You racially profiled me, demanded my documents without cause, and handcuffed me as a joke. Those aren't errors in judgment, officer. Those are civil rights violations." Rodriguez stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. "Ma'am, we truly apologize. If we had known who you were—" "If you had known who I was," Sarah interrupted, her anger finally breaking through her calm exterior. "So you're saying it's acceptable to treat other black women this way, just not the governor's daughter? Is that your defense?" Both officers fell silent, realizing that every word they spoke was only making things worse. The crowd murmured in agreement with Sarah's words. Someone shouted, "That's right, tell them." Sarah took a deep breath, composing herself. She had not wanted this confrontation. She had not wanted to pull rank or make a scene. But she also could not let this pass, could not let these officers think their behavior was acceptable just because they apologized after learning her identity. "Your badge numbers," she repeated firmly. "Now." Daniels recited his badge number in a voice barely above a whisper. Rodriguez followed suit. Sarah pulled out her phone and typed them into her notes, along with the date, time, and location. She also noted the patrol car number and took several photos of both officers, the vehicle, and the surrounding area. "I assume you have body cameras?" she asked. Both officers nodded miserably. They knew those cameras had recorded everything, every inappropriate comment, every unjustified action. That footage would be subpoenaed, reviewed, and likely shown to their superiors, internal affairs investigators, and possibly even played in court. Good, Sarah said. I want that footage preserved. I will be filing a formal complaint, and I will be reviewing your records to see if this is a pattern of behavior. A black SUV suddenly pulled into the parking lot, followed by another sedan. Sarah recognized them immediately as security vehicles from the governor's office. Someone must have called ahead, or perhaps her security detail had been tracking her phone and noticed the unusual delay. 4 men in dark suits stepped out, their trained eyes immediately assessing the situation. The lead security officer, Marcus Webb, approached quickly. Ms. Thompson, are you all right? His eyes moved to the 2 police officers and his expression hardened. What happened here? I'll explain in the car, Marcus, Sarah said calmly. But I'm fine. Daniels and Rodriguez looked like they wanted to disappear into the pavement. The arrival of official state security made the situation even more real, even more serious. This was not going away. This was going to be investigated at the highest levels. Marcus Webb turned to the officers, his voice cold and professional. I'm going to need your names and badge numbers as well. This incident will be reported to your chief and to the state attorney general's office. We already gave them to Ms. Thompson, Daniels said quietly. All the fight gone from him. Then you know this is far from over, Marcus replied. He gently guided Sarah toward the SUV, where another security officer held the door open for her. Before getting in, Sarah turned back one more time to look at officers Daniels and Rodriguez. They stood by their patrol car, looking utterly defeated, the reality of their actions finally sinking in completely. She felt no satisfaction in their fear, only deep sadness that this was still happening, still necessary, still a reality that black people faced every single day. I hope you learn from this, she said to them, her voice carrying across the parking lot one final time. I hope you realize that every person you stop, regardless of their race or background, deserves the same respect and dignity that you would want for yourself or your family. Badge or no badge, you're not above the law. You're meant to uphold it. With that, she got into the SUV. As the vehicle pulled away, she watched through the window as the crowd began to disperse, many of them still recording on their phones, still talking about what they had witnessed. The story would spread through Millbrook like wildfire, and by tomorrow it would likely reach far beyond this small town. Sarah leaned back in her seat, closing her eyes for a moment. Her peaceful visit home had turned into a nightmare, but perhaps something good could come from it. Perhaps this incident would spark the conversations that needed to happen, the reforms that needed to be made. She had the platform, the influence, and now the personal experience to push for real change. Are you sure you're okay? Marcus asked from the front seat, his concern evident. I will be, Sarah replied, opening her eyes. But first, I need to call my father. He needs to hear about this from me before it hits the news. She pulled out her phone, knowing that the call she was about to make would set in motion a series of events that would shake the Millbrook Police Department to its core. Governor Marcus Thompson sat in his office at the state capitol, reviewing budget proposals when his private line rang. He recognized his daughter's number immediately and smiled as he answered. Sarah, how's your visit to Millbrook going? I thought you weren't supposed to call until this evening. There was a brief pause on the other end, and Marcus's smile faded. He knew his daughter well enough to recognize when something was wrong, even through silence. Dad, Sarah said finally, her voice controlled but strained. Something happened this morning. I'm fine, but you need to hear about it before the media does. Marcus stood up from his desk, already moving toward the window that overlooked the Capitol grounds. What happened? Are you hurt? I'm not hurt, Sarah assured him. But I was stopped by 2 Millbrook police officers this morning. They racially profiled me, demanded my documents without cause, and then handcuffed me in the Morrison's coffee shop parking lot as some kind of joke. Marcus felt his blood run cold, then immediately boil with rage. He gripped the phone tighter, forcing himself to stay calm for his daughter's sake. They handcuffed you? On what grounds? No grounds, Dad. They claimed there were reports of stolen vehicles in the area, but it was clearly just an excuse. They didn't know who I was until they ran my information. The moment they realized, they panicked and tried to apologize, but by then, half the town had witnessed it and recorded it on their phones. Marcus closed his eyes, decades of similar experiences flooding back to him. He had worked his entire life to build a career in public service, to break barriers, to ensure that his children would face fewer obstacles than he had. Yet here was his daughter, accomplished and respected in her own right, being treated like a criminal in his hometown simply because of the color of her skin. "Where are you now?" he asked. Security picked me up. "We're heading to Mom's house now. I wanted to tell you myself before you heard about it from someone else." "You did the right thing," Marcus said, his voice heavy with emotion. "Sarah, I'm so sorry this happened to you. This should never have happened." Governor Thompson entered the office, his expression resolute but caring. "The room is ready. Are you sure you want to come up with me?" Sarah stood, squaring her shoulders. "I'm sure, Dad. Let's do this." They walked together through the marble corridors of the Capitol, their footsteps echoing off the high ceilings. Marcus placed his hand on his daughter's shoulder as they approached the press room doors. "Just remember, you have nothing to prove. You were the victim here. Whatever you feel, whatever you want to say, it's valid." The doors opened and camera flashes immediately lit up the room. Governor Thompson walked to the podium with Sarah standing slightly behind him. The murmur of conversation died down as he adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," Marcus began, his voice carrying the weight of authority and barely controlled emotion. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. Yesterday morning, something happened that has compelled me to address the public immediately. Not just as your governor, but as a father, and as a black man who has faced discrimination throughout his life." He paused, looking directly into the cameras. "Yesterday, my daughter Sarah, who serves as my chief legal counsel and is one of the finest attorneys in this state, was racially profiled, harassed, and unlawfully handcuffed by 2 Millbrook police officers while visiting her childhood hometown. She had committed no crime. She had violated no laws. Her only apparent offense was driving while black in a small town." The room erupted with reporters shouting questions, but Marcus raised his hand for silence. "I'll take questions in a moment, but first I want Sarah to tell you what happened in her own words." Sarah stepped forward to the microphone, her heart pounding but her resolve firm. She had prosecuted cases in court, argued before state committees, and given presentations to hundreds of people. But this felt different. This was personal, vulnerable, and terrifyingly public. "Thank you, Dad," she said, her voice steady. "Yesterday morning at approximately 8:15, I stopped at Morrison's coffee shop in Millbrook to get coffee before visiting my mother. As I returned to my car, Officers Daniels and Rodriguez approached me and demanded my license and registration, claiming there had been reports of stolen vehicles in the area," she continued, providing a detailed factual account of the encounter. She described being asked to place her hands on the car, the moment when Daniels handcuffed her as a joke, the humiliation of standing in restraints while people watched and recorded. Her voice remained professional, but those watching could see the pain in her eyes. When the officers finally ran my information and realized who I was, their entire demeanor changed. They became apologetic, nervous, desperate to undo what they had done. But here's what troubles me most. Officer Rodriguez actually said, "If we had known who you were." As if it would have been acceptable to treat me that way if I wasn't the governor's daughter. As if the countless other black women and men who face this treatment daily somehow deserve it because they don't have connections or power. Sarah looked directly at the cameras, her voice growing stronger. "I am privileged. I have resources, education, family connections that most people don't have, and yet even with all of that, I was still seen as a threat, still treated with suspicion and disrespect, still handcuffed without cause. If this can happen to me, imagine what happens to people without my advantages. Imagine how many incidents go unreported, how many people suffer in silence because they believe no one will listen or care." The room was completely silent now, every reporter hanging on her words. "This is not an isolated incident. Our research has uncovered 17 formal complaints of racial profiling against the Millbrook Police Department, in the past 5 years alone. Officers Daniels and Rodriguez themselves have been named in previous complaints. This is a pattern, a culture, a systemic problem that requires systemic solutions. Governor Thompson stepped back to the microphone, which is why I'm announcing today that I have requested the State Attorney General to launch a comprehensive investigation into the Millbrook Police Department's practices. Additionally, I will be proposing legislation that mandates implicit bias training for all law enforcement officers in our state, requires body cameras for all officers, and establishes an independent civilian review board to investigate complaints of police misconduct. He paused, his voice becoming more personal. Some may say I'm being too harsh, that I'm overreacting because this involved my daughter. But I say this: every person is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's loved one. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity and respect by those sworn to protect them. If we can't guarantee that basic human right, then we have failed as a society. The press conference continued for another 40 minutes as reporters peppered them with questions. Sarah answered many herself, refusing to hide behind her father's position. She detailed exactly what the officers said, how they behaved, why their actions constituted racial profiling and civil rights violations. One reporter asked pointedly, "Ms. Thompson, do you think these officers should be fired?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I think these officers should face consequences appropriate to their actions. They violated my civil rights, they abused their authority, and they showed a pattern of discriminatory behavior. Whether that results in termination, suspension, or other disciplinary measures should be determined by a thorough investigation, but I also think we need to look beyond individual officers to the system that allows this behavior to continue. Training matters, accountability matters, leadership matters." Another reporter called out, "Governor, your critics are already saying you're using your position to seek revenge. How do you respond?" Marcus's jaw tightened. "This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. If this had happened to any other citizen, I would hope those citizens would have the courage to speak up and demand accountability. The only difference is that I have a platform to amplify that demand. I'm using my position not for revenge, but for reform. There's a significant distinction." As the press conference wound down, Sarah felt simultaneously exhausted and energized. She had told her story, made her voice heard, and hopefully planted seeds of change. But she also knew this was just the beginning. The real work would come in the days and weeks ahead. Later that afternoon, back in the governor's office, Marcus received a call from Chief Patterson. "Governor, I've reviewed the body camera footage from yesterday's incident. It's damning. Officers Daniels and Rodriguez have been suspended without pay, pending formal disciplinary hearings. I want to personally apologize to your daughter for what happened." "Apologies are appreciated but insufficient," Marcus replied. "What concrete steps are you taking to ensure this doesn't happen again?" Patterson outlined a plan for immediate reforms: additional training, revised procedures for traffic stops, mandatory bias awareness courses. Marcus listened but remained skeptical. He had heard promises of reform before, from various departments over the years. Words were easy. Follow-through was hard. "Chief Patterson, here's what I need from you: complete transparency, open access to all internal investigation files, cooperation with the State Attorney General's investigation, and most importantly, cultural change within your department. If you can deliver that, we can work together. If not, I'll find someone who can. You have my full cooperation, Governor," Patterson said quietly. "And sir, for what it's worth, I'm ashamed this happened in my department. I thought we were better than this. I was wrong." After hanging up, Marcus turned to Sarah, who had been listening to the conversation. "How do you feel?" he asked. Sarah thought about the question. How did she feel? Angry, certainly. Hurt, violated, but also hopeful. "I feel like maybe something good can come from this. Maybe my experience can be the catalyst for changes that protect others. That would make the humiliation worth it." Marcus hugged his daughter tightly. "I'm so proud of you. Not just for how you handled today, but for how you handled yesterday. You kept your composure, documented everything, followed procedures. You showed those officers what real professionalism looks like." As evening fell over the Capitol, Sarah stood by the window looking out at the city lights. Her phone had been buzzing all day with messages of support from colleagues, friends, and strangers who had seen the press conference. Many shared their own stories of profiling and discrimination. Each message reinforced what she already knew. This problem was widespread, deeply rooted, and desperately in need of attention. Tomorrow, she would meet with the Attorney General to discuss the investigation. Next week, she would work with legislators to draft the reform bills her father had announced. The road ahead would be long and difficult. There would be resistance, pushback, people who claimed she was overreacting or playing the race card. But Sarah Thompson had never backed down from a fight for justice, and she was not about to start now. What had happened to her in that coffee shop parking lot was just one moment, one incident, one story, but it was part of a much larger narrative, one that needed to be rewritten through courage, persistence, and unwavering commitment to equality under the law. 6 months after the incident at Morrison's coffee shop, Sarah Thompson sat in a conference room at Millbrook Town Hall, surrounded by community members, police officers, civil rights advocates, and local officials. The room that had once been filled with tension and distrust now hummed with cautious optimism. Today marked the public presentation of the Community Policing Reform Initiative, a comprehensive program born from the painful events of that October morning. The State Attorney General's investigation had uncovered troubling patterns within the Millbrook Police Department and several other small-town departments across the state. Officers Daniels and Rodriguez had been terminated following formal disciplinary hearings. The evidence had been overwhelming: body camera footage, witness testimonies, and records of previous complaints that had been inadequately addressed. Both men had initially tried to defend their actions but eventually accepted their dismissal without appeal. Chief Patterson, to his credit, had not made excuses. He had cooperated fully with investigators, even when it revealed uncomfortable truths about his department's culture. He sat now at the front of the room, looking older than he had 6 months ago, but also more determined. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patterson began, standing at the podium, "6 months ago, members of my department committed acts that violated the public trust and betrayed everything law enforcement should stand for. 2 officers racially profiled and unlawfully detained a citizen. But as the investigation showed, the problem was not just 2 officers. It was a culture that allowed such behavior to occur and persist." He paused, making eye contact with Sarah, who sat in the front row beside her father. "Ms. Thompson, I owe you another apology, though I know words can never fully repair the harm done. Your courage in speaking out has not only held individuals accountable, but has sparked reforms that will benefit countless others. Thank you." Sarah nodded graciously, acknowledging his words without diminishing the gravity of what had happened. She had spent the past 6 months working tirelessly on police reform legislation, meeting with advocacy groups, listening to stories from other victims of racial profiling, and helping to design training programs that went beyond superficial diversity workshops to address implicit bias at its roots. The reforms implemented in Millbrook and mandated across the state were comprehensive. Every officer now wore a body camera that could not be manually turned off during interactions with the public. A civilian oversight board had been established with real authority to investigate complaints and recommend disciplinary actions. Officers were required to complete 40 hours of cultural competency and de-escalation training annually. Perhaps most significantly, the standards for traffic stops had been revised to require documented reasonable suspicion or probable cause, with supervisors randomly reviewing stop reports to identify potential patterns of bias. Community liaison officers had been assigned to different neighborhoods, tasked with building relationships and trust rather than simply responding to calls. The Millbrook PD had also begun recruiting more diverse candidates, recognizing that a police force should reflect the community it serves. Dr. James Morrison, a community activist who had been vocal about police practices for years, spoke next. "I'll be honest, when this incident first happened, I was angry. Another black person humiliated by police. Another day, another injustice. But I'm standing here today because I've seen genuine change. Not perfect change, not complete change, but real movement in the right direction." He turned to look at the officers in the room. "Some of you were resistant at first. Some of you probably still think this is all unnecessary. But I've watched you engage with this process. I've seen officers taking the training seriously, asking hard questions, challenging their own assumptions. That gives me hope." Officer Maria Gonzalez, a 10-year veteran of the Millbrook PD, stood to share her perspective. "The training has been eye-opening. I thought I understood bias and prejudice, but I learned that even with good intentions, we all carry unconscious biases that affect our decisions. The new protocols don't make our jobs harder, they make them clearer. When I conduct a traffic stop now, I know exactly what I need to document and why. It protects citizens and it protects good officers. The meeting continued with presentations of data showing early results from the reforms. Traffic stop statistics were now being tracked by race, location, and outcome. The initial numbers showed that black drivers had been stopped at rates significantly disproportionate to their population percentage, but those disparities were beginning to narrow. Complaint numbers had actually increased, which reformers took as a positive sign that people felt more comfortable reporting issues. After the official presentations concluded, the meeting opened for community questions and comments. Sarah listened as residents expressed both appreciation for the changes and continued concerns about implementation. An elderly black woman stood and spoke about her grandson being stopped 3 times in 2 months, each time released without citation. "How do we know this isn't just the same old profiling with better paperwork?" she asked. Sarah stood to respond. "That's exactly why the data tracking and civilian oversight are so important. We're now able to identify patterns that were previously hidden. If your grandson is being stopped repeatedly without cause, that should show up in the data and trigger a review. I encourage you to file a complaint with the Oversight Board. That's what they're there for." Another resident, a white man in his 50s, asked bluntly, "Aren't we making it harder for police to do their jobs? What if they hesitate when they shouldn't, because they're worried about complaints?" Chief Patterson fielded this one. "I understand that concern and I've heard it from some officers. But proper training and clear protocols don't inhibit good policing. They enhance it. Officers should think before they act. They should have legitimate reasons for their actions. If that extra moment of consideration prevents unnecessary confrontations, everyone is safer." As the meeting drew to a close, Governor Thompson addressed the crowd. He had remained mostly silent throughout, wanting the focus to be on the community and the local changes rather than state politics. But now he stood, his presence commanding attention. "Change is uncomfortable," he said simply. "It requires us to examine ourselves, our institutions, our assumptions. 6 months ago, my daughter was humiliated in this town, but she and I made a choice not to simply be angry, not to simply demand punishment. We chose to channel that anger into action, into reform, into building something better." He looked around the room at the diverse faces gathered there. What happened to Sarah happens to people every day in communities across this country. Most don't have the platform she has. Most suffer in silence, their complaints ignored, their dignity trampled. But change begins with one voice, one stand, one community deciding that enough is enough. Marcus's voice grew stronger. Millbrook has become a model for what's possible when people come together in good faith to address injustice. You haven't solved racism. You haven't eliminated bias. Those are generational challenges, but you've taken concrete steps to create accountability, transparency, and fairness. That's real progress. After the meeting, Sarah walked through downtown Millbrook, flanked by her security detail but feeling more at ease than she had on her previous visit. She stopped by Morrison's coffee shop, the site of her ordeal, and went inside. The same elderly woman was working behind the counter, and this time recognition was immediate. "Ms. Thompson," the woman said warmly, "I'm so glad you came back. After what happened here, I worried you'd never want to see this place again." "I thought about staying away," Sarah admitted. "But this is still my hometown. I have good memories here, and I'm not going to let one bad experience take that from me." The woman prepared Sarah's coffee, refusing to accept payment. "This one's on me. And thank you. My grandson is in high school, and he told me he feels safer knowing there are people watching out for how police treat kids who look like him." Sarah smiled, touched by the comment. That's what this is all about. Making sure every young person can grow up feeling safe, protected, and valued. As she left the coffee shop, Sarah noticed Officer Gonzalez across the street, helping an elderly man with his groceries. The officer looked up, saw Sarah, and nodded respectfully. Sarah nodded back. This was not friendship, not yet. But it was a start. It was recognition, acknowledgement, a shared understanding that they were all part of the same community working toward the same goal. That evening, Sarah sat with her parents in her mother's living room, the same house where she had grown up. Grace Thompson had prepared dinner, and the three of them talked about the day's meeting, the progress made, the work still ahead. "You handled everything perfectly," Grace said to her daughter. "I know it wasn't easy going back there, facing those people, reliving that experience." "It was necessary," Sarah replied. "If I had stayed away hidden, let my anger consume me, nothing would have changed. Sometimes the hardest thing is the right thing." Marcus raised his glass. "To my daughter, who took one of the worst days of her life and transformed it into something meaningful. You've made more difference in 6 months than most people make in a lifetime." They clinked glasses, but Sarah shook her head slightly. "We've made a difference, Dad. This wasn't just me. It was you using your platform, Chief Patterson choosing accountability over defense,